Applications are evolving. We've seen a lot of applications take a role that's a little different than what they traditionally have had. So applications, for the most part, from a business perspective, have all been about supporting the business. It's been about, making things easier, doing things like payroll, all these different types of applications we've had in business forever. So these traditional applications were typically deployed in a very simple format. You had one server and you put a single application on top of it. Well, that's an interesting way of doing it, but when you start talking about scale, you start talking about more applications, it can become very difficult. So when we think about what we did to fix that, we moved into virtualization. So virtualizing the application allows us to be able to take one server and be able to leverage multiple applications on top of it. So what we did is we created a solution, that leveraged virtualization. We created a hypervisor. That hypervisor then gave us the ability to be able to, emulate and simulate multiple servers. So instead of having 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 different servers, I can basically use one server and emulate the capabilities across multiple applications. This allowed for much more efficiency and economy associated with the utilization of those devices. Because before, with traditional applications, you might use 20 to 30% of that server. Well, guess what? It's just sitting there sucking power and wasting money. Right? You weren't able to leverage all the capabilities of it. So by moving to virtualization, we saw the ability then to be able to run many applications on the same piece of hardware. It was a very big jump forward, and we've seen a lot of organizations have moved really, pretty dramatically into a virtualized environment. At this point, it's important to really introduce a concept here. And, so we're very familiar in a lot of cases with virtualization, that ability to be able to leverage, that single server for multiple tasks. Well, when we start thinking about what this means, back in the old days, you had, this environment where you would build a server, and in some cases, you'd have multiple servers in your environment, and you'd give them names. These were servers that, you would, almost like you were raising children in some cases. They would be given a name, you would use that as a way to be able to reference them. In fact, early in my career, I had an environment where we had, 7 servers, and they were named after 7 dwarves, right? And that was just an example of kind of how we did things. So in the case of that environment, they were really used more like pets. Right? They're given names. So like the example here is fluffy.cisco.com. Well, but in the case of, where we're seeing applications moving to, when we think about virtual machines, they're really operating in a much different environment. And when we start to think about being able to automate cloud, in a lot of cases, these virtual machines are spun up dynamically. They're taken down automatically as well. So they don't have this name concept. It's really kind of more of a cattle approach, where instead of being assigned a name, they're assigned a number. So in this case, VM1138.cisco.com. We don't care what the name is. We just care what the service is. And oh, by the way, I don't care what server it sits on. It can be anywhere in my data center. And if something happens to that server, I'm not going to shed a tear. I'm going to just throw that thing away and get another one. So that's why we're seeing kind of that approach that we do within this environment, where it's really more about the service and the capability as opposed to underlying hardware. That's fundamentally what we've seen shift. And then to take that the next step further, it really gets into more of an application evolution. So we've talked about the traditional application. We've moved into a virtualized environment. Now what we're seeing is this concept of application evolution that's called cloud native. And what a cloud native application is it's an application that's basically distributed and decoupled off of a single virtual machine or a single server and spread across many different servers. So if you think about applications like Facebook or Amazon's applications, those aren't applications that sit on individual servers. They're basically components that are spread across very large data centers. And this has allowed us to be able to think differently about our networks and be able to think differently about the data center as a whole. What does it take to be able to make this stuff happen? You guessed it, cloud technologies.